Welcome to the Butterfly Tumblr Radio channel. Are you ready to start today's story? Let's get started. In a story filled with betrayal and revenge, an ordinary diesel technician discovers his wife's secret, inadvertently uncovering a complex tangle of emotions, a meticulously planned divorce, an unexpected fire, and the hidden truths lurking in the shadows. This tale will take you into a world brimming with suspense. Are you ready? Join me as we delve into the inner workings of this family, exploring the astonishing secrets concealed behind the facade of everyday life. I returned home 3 hours early from my job as a diesel technician. For the past 2 months, everyone in the shop has worked 50 hours per week. We have a contract with a tight deadline to rebuild over 50 diesel engines. We discovered today that we were officially 2 days ahead of schedule. We are exhausted and drained of energy. The employers knew it. I'm heading home. I knew I was filthy since my normal filthy Lisa usually waits for me with a robe so I can go straight to the shower. She doesn't get home for another 2 hours. So I'm heading straight to the laundry room. I'll put my filthy clothes in my designated basket and go naked to the bathroom to take a shower. Rebuilding diesel engines. I work with a lot of chemicals, but thus far they haven't affected my sense of smell. I know I stink from sweating, but I also stench of chemicals and exhaust. The laundry room is small, the entire home is little. This 1,100 square foot home in Overland Park, Kansas, features 2 bedrooms, a 2 and 1 2-vehicle garage, and a spacious lot near the interstate. Don't give me any crap about the school board. I do not want to hear that I didn't vote for those a-holes. So just shut your damn face about it. We acquired this repo from the bank for less than $55,000. The previous owners had completely wrecked the building, but I knew the bones were sturdy. We ended up gutting each room at a time. We only got a fully functional bathroom and a barely functional kitchen operational. The first 6 months were terrible. When I take off my shirt I smell something odd. But it's just the pile of dirty clothes at my feet. I smelled sex. I recognized Lisa's odor. But there was more, and it was powerful. I knew that couldn't be me. Her period started 2 nights ago. She didn't want any love making during those periods. Therefore I constantly avoided taking up her clothes. I noticed and smelled dried sweat and cigarette smoke on her blouse and slacks. She does not smoke. Derek, the jackass wrench who leases our garage, does this in his spare time. Derek converts rice buckets into low-end street races on the cheap. It appears that he was working on more than just autos. There is zero tolerance when you trust someone. You do not ask probing inquiries. You don't see past their words. I have no patience for this stuff. I did not accept this nonsense from my first wife. And since my name is Alex, I don't with my current wife. I assumed that since we were both burned in our first marriages, we would never consider screwing anybody else. Not physically nor emotionally. I believed our lives were quite open and supportive of one another. I guess I was incorrect. It's DJVU all over again. We described our connection as one of recovery after being burned. Recovering from being burned again is how I'll get over it. I got quite proficient at planning the rehab for this fixer-upper. Those planning skills will also aid me in the faux marriage. Then it struck me, son of a, I need to calm down. Sit calmly on the washing machine, exhale slowly. Repeat for another 20 times, be calm. Do the mindfulness crap, take your downtime, Alex. You are all you have. 20 minutes of putting my life on hold, let me ponder without fear. I now have 2 aims. The first stage is to prove beyond a doubt that she is cheating. The second step is to formally end this marriage with minimal financial loss. Well, I believe I have 3 goals. The third goal is to go forward with my life as soon as feasible. The easiest thing to do first is end the marriage. Yes, right, in my ever-loving fantasies. I can simply snap my fingers and it's over. Just like the last time. When in doubt, consult Wikipedia. It is not always completely correct, but it provides an excellent overview. A Google search wiki: how to divorce in Kansas. I may not know much about computers, but I can perform simple searches wholly. With no children, there are only 3 documents. And if the judge agrees in at least 60 days. The first is the civil cover sheet. It is about who we are. This is our information. It is the same information we use to file taxes. The affidavit regarding domestic relations comes next. That includes our total assets, income, liquid assets, expenses, personal property, real estate, and debts. The final step is to file a divorce petition, which details who receives what we agreed to. The judge makes the last decision. And everything can go wrong if he says so. The law does not require that what we own be divided equally. I dig through our office desk and retrieve last year's tax returns, our 401k banking and loan statements. We were both broke after our previous divorces, so we made it a point not to get into debt. Without a mortgage, we only spent what was absolutely necessary. All of our rent money was spent on housing repairs, supplies, and basic living expenses. We were also aware that a downturn in the economy may bankrupt us again. And I don't trust the scumbags at the top of the money chain. We've known each other for 5 years, married 3 years, and bought this house. We were able to rebuild our finances. We were finally moving ahead in life now at 29. I'm a 2-time loser. We owed $400 for her automobile and $700 for my used truck. Both automobiles are worthless. We purchased them 2 years ago, and they are now both 7 years old. Our credit was still bad from our previous divorces, and our car loans were at 15. I'm confident they are not worth what we owe. She earns a little more than I do, and she entered the marriage with slightly less debt. For the past 4 years, we have both been able to contribute $112,000 every year to our 401k. If you include the matching, the market has blossomed, and she has a balance of $65,000. I have $60,000. An emergency fund of $88,000 and $200 in checking. The checking account is only so high because some large bills are coming due soon. Laws are what they are. I know I could still get screwed. How should I approach this divide of our possessions? What are my most significant marriage goals? Quick. Do not lose your shirt. No. Not like the last time when I also lost my soul to screw it. Another goddamn merry-go-round. No. Not a merry-go-round. What's the old Johnny Cash song line? I was flushed out of your heart's bathroom. The angel on my left shoulder speaks. Okay, Alex. Be honest, be transparent, and non-confrontational. The devil on my right shoulder says that if she fights it, the cops will screw her. Make it clear to her that you will punish her severely. You won't be the only one to lose. Make her feel the pain again. It's terrible having to go through this again. But now I have another aim to accomplish. How do I verify that she is cheating? I'm overwhelmed with nanny cams, internet cameras, and other technology. I'm certain they can be rented, and I could get someone to put it up for me. I'm good with engines. I'm terrible at setting up software and hardware. Walking aimlessly through what will soon no longer be our small 2-bedroom home. I've realized something. The truth is, I've never seen anything that suggests she was committing the dirty deed in our bed. Lisa's car's back seat is usable but quite small. The pretend branch has those little rice burners. There isn't much room either. The garage is the only other spot that provides privacy while remaining free. The half is in the garage. There is an old futon that would work. She has 1 hour for lunch, and the wannabe wrench has a day job nearby. I head over to the garage. It's in the back of the property. There are 5 bays with the half bay used as a storage room or office. I haven't been here in 3 months since he opened the door. I smell hydrocarbon. There are open, empty chemical containers and paint cans lying around. I had to navigate mounds of soiled rags soaked in grease, solvent paint, and paint thinner. It appears that he was throwing used motor oil on them, or the cement floor. Is this location becoming a super fun site? I open the storage room door and discover that I found their whereabouts. The trash contains 2 used condom wrappers. The condoms are coated with fresh poop. Be calm. Slowly take a breath in, slowly breathe out, repeat. This is it. I want to kill both the imbecile and the witch. He's plowing her. Slowly take a breath in. Slowly breathe out, repeat, son of a witch. It's actually becoming easier. I know I have to return to work. So I arrive home at the usual time. I am a trained mechanic, a professional. And the one who is pounding my wife isn't even qualified as a parking lot mechanic. There are mounds of used parts, tools, paint cans, hands, and other stuff scattered across the 2 garage floors. His attached lightweight extension wires to the trusses to add outlets. There are hazardous substances in stacks within the garage. He has turned this area into a fire hazard and chemical waste fire hazard. I received it. It's the ideal response. She started her period yesterday. So she was giving him bum fits. They'll probably be back shortly. She has a locator app on her phone because she has lost it multiple times. I'll be able to see if she's here for lunch. Which usually means they'll be together. The garage presents a fire hazard. Captain Mike is our local fire captain. And we repair his diesel engines on a time and materials basis. I'm confident I could get him to inspect the garage. I wonder if he could contact the city inspector to see if there is a business operating in this residential zone. I will leave that to him. In the past, he has told me stories about what firefighters witness. Finding 2 cheaters causing havoc would not be the first or 20th time he had seen it. Back to work at the main shop's desk area. I take out the paperwork I brought from home and turn on the old desktop. I'm terrible at using computers. But my limited familiarity with Excel works. It's the program of my choice. Whatever you put in one of those small boxes stays there. That's true. But I can always obtain assistance from the office workers. They feel sorry for us dumb mechanics. I understand that the list of things we own begins. More than an hour in, I call the fire station. It is now scheduled to meet with Captain Mike later today if he's not on a call. Overall, I spend an hour and a half listing our belongings and creating what I believe is a fair division of property. Printing 2 copies. It's time to get to the firehouse. I'll request an extended lunch tomorrow morning to take care of some personal affairs. Work is fairly excellent about making up time later. I know that I'll have plenty of time later. Hello. Alex, what can I do for you? Captain Mike spoke to me as he reached for my hand to shake. So could we enter your office? It's sort of private. He looked at me concerned and led the way. What is the problem? Is anyone stealing anything? Is there anything unsafe? Anything else? Sitting upright on the chair in front of his desk, I stated gently, Captain Mike. Have we been working together for the past 7 years? He nodded. I have never asked you for a favor. He shakes his head. No, I have a huge one for you. But I don't want you to do anything that would get you into trouble. I believe we get along well together. Why don't you just say it? What if I can't? We've only talked about getting the PFD serviced again. I'm sure my wife is getting some on the side. We rent our garage to a wannabe mechanic. And I believe it's him. What do you want me to do? This is not in my field of employment. It appears that they are using the storage room in the garage that I rent to him. The good and bad news is that he keeps the area as a number 1 fire hazard. I walked in there earlier today and tossed a spark. Or one of his cigarette butts. The entire structure would be built in minutes. Could you set up a fire inspection while they are at it? I believe they do it around lunchtime because they both work close. If you and I walk in on them, it will not be a he said situation. She said a few images. And I started filing for divorce. I waited a second before adding that I could use a witness and someone to help me avoid making dumb decisions. I desperately need your aid on the other side. The inspection will prevent the garage from catching fire, resulting in less labor for you in the long run. Captain Mike was quiet, looking at me long and hard. I'm guessing you were trying to keep someone out of jail. I nodded affirmatively as he proceeded. As an officer and firefighter for over 25 years, I can tell you that I've professionally witnessed a number of, shall we say, incidents similar to this. I will conduct the inspection as you wish, as it is my responsibility. Whatever we discover there, as the owner has invited me to the property, will become public record. Does this help? I smiled and asked, I'm not sure when I'll be there for the property inspection. But I'll text you when I'm around. Could you please text me if you are on a call and unable to make it? He nodded and I shook his hand before leaving. I previously had a positive working relationship with him. And he was generally supportive of what I wanted done. I guess he's done this before. The only thing he did was decline the beer I offered him. He assured me he'd reserve it for when everything was over and he was off duty. Now is the moment to go home and act as if nothing is wrong. I began the day by ensuring that Lisa's phone locate app worked properly. I watched her leave the house and go to work. The second thing I did was check in with Captain if he was heading out on a call. He would text me right away. The morning was horrible for me after 10:00 a.m. I kept checking my phone every 10 minutes. After 11:00 a.m. it was every 5 minutes. And I was a nervous wreck at 11:35. I noticed that Lisa's phone was no longer working. I had to wait 10 minutes until she arrived at the house. That's when I texted Captain Mike. And we met 2 blocks away in the back parking lot of Mickey D's. I was worried as hell. But Captain Mike seemed to love the expedition. We left for my house. I noticed that there were 2 cars in the driveway. Lisa is in the wannabe mechanic's rice bucket. Lisa had no reason to stay at home as previously discussed. We parked several houses away from the garage. Standing in front of my house, I murmured to Captain Mike, "We should first check the house to see if anyone is there." He moved toward the garage, cupping his ear and placing his finger to his lips for stillness. That was when he grinned and murmured, "I can hear them out back for years. My hearing has been severely damaged." He took out his clipboard and official camera and began drafting the citation while photographing the fire code breaches. It barely took a minute outside the garage. Then 30 seconds for each garage bay. Standing in front of the closed door where the noises were coming from, he grinned at me and gestured inside. I nodded in agreement. The little room in the back, used as an office as well as a storage area for small parts and hand tools, also included the old futon. The 2 people on the futon heard nothing as the door opened silently. They were causing havoc until they noticed a camera flash and the bright overhead lights turn on. Then all hell broke loose. Derek pulled away from Lisa as she shouted. Lisa tried to find something to cover herself. But all she had was a soiled overall with black lube smeared all over her exposed chest. The fire marshal laughed. I did too. It was a terrible chuckle for me. Like discovering a rat in the bottom of a 5-gallon paint can. They had nowhere to run. Tired of waiting for the crying to stop, Captain Mike gazed at the 2 of them before focusing on the wannabe. "By the way, the purpose of my visit is to issue you citations for fire code breaches." He ripped off a piece of paper and handed it to the new Derek. "These issues must be resolved before you return here. This building is closed until it passes the next inspection. Any questions?" Lisa could barely stop crying for both of them. It was a deer in the headlights look. Captain Mike turned to go as he fired a parting shot. "By the way, if you don't clean up that feces waste, I'll call the health department, who will also close you down for their offenses." He chuckled and replied, "Have a nice day. It is a joy to serve you." He turned and rubbed my back, giving me an "I'm sorry" expression before leaving. I followed him outside to the home. I locked and bolted all of the doors and windows and took out a Diet Coke. I went into her bedroom and began flinging all of her clothes into the living room, which was the nearest entrance to either her car or the small spare bedroom. I knew she would locate the key we hid outdoors, but she demanded to know immediately when it was ended. I finished in 20 minutes and looked outdoors. Both of their autos were gone. It was time to return to work after a 2-hour lunch break. I'll get home later that night. I sat in the living room. She must have come home and taken all of her clothes. Her furniture was missing, as were a few other items. I examined the garage, and a rice burner he was working on was missing. I was cursing at the world when the doorbell rang. I wished it was not the 304. Captain Mike held out a Jim Beam handle and 2 glasses. He said, "I thought you'd enjoy some company tonight." That's when he gave me a bro hug, punched my arm, and went into the kitchen to get some ice. First and foremost, stop calling me Captain, okay? He offered me a tumbler filled with ice and bourbon. Drink this one slowly. Don't get shit-faced on me so quickly. All I knew was that I needed someone here tonight. And he was here. He listened to my rage and rave. Cry or yell, whinge and complain. It was 5 years into the life I believed we were creating. And it went up in smoke in that washing basket. I awoke in the morning still wearing everything except my shoes. I was on the couch wrapped in a blanket. Mike left a handwritten message to call. He stopped by over the next 2 evenings last night. The doorbell rang. I've been dreading the doorbell. Lisa stood at the door. The wannabe was a few feet behind her. I closed the door and turned the lights off. She rang the doorbell and attempted to enter with her key. But the locks had been changed that first evening. We also changed the garage locks. It was the best $150 I've ever spent. After the doorbell rang for a few minutes, Mike stood up and said, "Let me handle it." I nodded affirmatively as he approached the front door and stepped outside, closing it behind him after 5 minutes. The tires screeched. I felt relieved until Mike strolled in with Lisa following behind him. "Alex, why don't you grab the documents you were working on and bring it to the kitchen table?" "Okay." He indicated to the shelf where I placed it over the past few days. Mike and I had discussed the split of property. And that's when I learned that his sister had gone through a horrific divorce. And he was well versed in the emotional, legal, and gut-wrenching misery of a broken marriage. He received assistance in his sister's divorce and felt compelled to aid others as well. Here was a man who believed in paying it forward and demonstrated it. Lisa sat at the far end, and I placed a copy of our assets and liabilities in front of her. I gave her a few minutes to check what we had. And then I began a summary. The house can be listed for $210,000 and should net out after paying the realtor approximately $22,000. Lisa gave a gasp. It was clear that she had no idea how much my efforts were worth after taxes, givebacks and other selling expenses. We should receive $194,000. You keep your car and payments while I keep mine. You keep your 401k balance at $65,000. While I keep mine at $60,000. We split the $88,000 emergency money and used the rest of the bank account to pay off bills. I've already paid off and terminated our credit cards. She cringed when I told her that if she agreed, we could file right away and perhaps move on within 60 days. At this time I tightened my teeth. Mike and I discussed multiple times how emotions were not appropriate in a money transaction. I recall that from the last time I may have been much younger and immature than I don't have that excuse anymore. "I apologize, Alex," Lisa said. "I did not mean to hurt you," I interrupted her. "Just do not go there. The issues in this marriage began a year in, which was 2 years ago. You wanted a gorgeous house, but we couldn't afford it. So I had to rehab this fix-upper. That's where my time, money and energy went," I sighed, releasing frustration and agony. "You weren't much assistance. You have been stepping out for what, how long?" I closed my eyes. "Actually, it makes no difference how long you have been getting strange. Isn't it?" She shakes her head. "No," I continued. "We were both cheated on in our first marriages. We both knew how that felt. Tell me if you saw me with another woman or even another man. What would you have done? Tell me everything would work out and be okay. Tell me that you will forgive me." As she turned away, she began to cry. I didn't bother passing her the tissues. She was going to be on her own. And it would start right now. The wannabe mechanic, I remarked as I gazed out the window at the garage. "I believe it started before we rented out the garage to the wannabe. That's when you started to notice some suspicious looks away." I could see her face reflected in a storm window. She was shown nodding yes and looking at the carpet. "Tired of living in a construction zone for large projects. The kitchen is in the main bathroom. We tried for 3 years to make its meet and acquire a decent place to live. It used up all of my vacation time over 3 years. The main bathroom took 6 weeks to complete because larger problems were uncovered, which added weeks to the timeline we wanted it. We wanted it. I wanted it because you did. I closed my eyes and linked my fingers. I didn't want to lose control over my hands working like dogs building our dream house. He snorted with contempt, or should I say, your ideal home's worth has climbed during the last 3 years. Honey, I'm going to end it right now. I am no longer your honey. This marriage died because you chose to get something additional. You cannot take it back. I can never trust you again, so do not even try. She hung her head and looked away. You entered into this marriage after being burned in your previous one. You needed to punish someone for it. Someone is always wrong. Someone always has to be made to pay. She began to protest when I hushed her with a glare. Make your ex pay. You have scorched me. When things go wrong in your life, someone has to pay. That is what you do. So do not give me any crap about this. She shivered. I know, I touched home with it. That's the trouble with people. They do ridiculous things for foolish reasons. I have seen you do stupid things before. Not as awful as this, but still utterly ridiculous. But it was early in our relationship, and we were able to sort things out. I did my own foolish too, and we worked it out. I halted. This was the atomic explosion of blunders. You couldn't have told me that would be able to pick up the pieces after such a massive betrayal. I went back and forth in the kitchen. We had 2 possibilities: fight it out and spend whatever money we have on lawyers, or we agree to anything and go soon. What would you like to do? I was holding another envelope. Lisa nodded. She knew it could quickly turn into a pissing match. She was well versed in the legal system and divorce proceedings. Her first marriage failed because she and her spouse were young and inexperienced. They spent more time bickering and fighting than figuring out how to make things work. Whenever there was a problem, he would find someone to connect with. He gave her a case of the craps 18 months into their marriage. After more than 3 years together, what started as anger evolved into hatred against his suggestion. She instructed her lawyer to make her spouse pay. In the end, they both needed to borrow money to pay off their lawyers. Nobody except their lawyers slept well because of their self-righteous rage. Lisa nodded at me to continue. I opened the package and took out a few sheets of paper. He then spread them out on the table so they could both read them clearly. To obtain a divorce in this state, all of our assets must be stated. I've recorded everything I could find. That's what the first document was about. He described the following document as a spreadsheet with 3 columns. Pointing to other columns, the property, who owns it, and how much it is worth. We both had little assets when we started this marriage. We were both broke and had terrible credit scores. When our careers became stable, we saved, lived cheaply, and paid 50,000 cash for this bank repo. I proposed that we sell the house and split the proceeds evenly. We also divided the small emergency fund we had made evenly and what remains of the checking account. In the center, you keep your 401k Burmese charts, I'll keep mine. We have no debt other than the autos, you take yours, and I will take mine. There is no income maintenance for either of us. I could tell Lisa was still in shock. And the cash amounts weren't helping. She was more than broke 5 years ago at the age of 24. And now at 29. She might walk away with more than 100,000 in her 401k. Why don't you think about it overnight? Just be sure no one is staying overnight in this house. This stunned her. I believed she could save the marriage. She was never one to overthink things. And now she understood that not only was her marriage destroyed, but the only place to sleep was with Derek in his filthy studio apartment. What the hell is going on with Lover Boy? He has been very wonderful to you. He should joyfully welcome you right now. All I know is that this is not the house. Not in this bedroom, not this bed, understand, Lisa? I began crying at this point. Great. Try, it's not going to work this time. Go outside to the garage, you're quite familiar with the futon. Right, if you truly need to sleep somewhere, you could do so there. She began to mouth something as I continued. Cut that there are some stains on the pad. While you're at it, why not count all of the condom wrappers in the trash? Everyone is downcast. She stood up and exited the street. She texted something. And Derek picked her up in a minute. I closed my eyes as Mike handed me a tumbler full of ice and Jim Beam. Alex, you did not do badly, not that awful. He picked up his glass. And we discussed everything that had happened. He departed about midnight. Lisa hadn't realized I was still tracking her with the phone locate app. I wanted to know where she was. And it told me so much. She was only at work or at the wannabe's place when I caught them. That building was filthy and full with cockroaches. Which made me happy. I spent my evenings cleaning up the garage. Which had been a super fun sight. There was no way I could exhibit the house like this. Work authorized me to transport the chemicals and other hydrocarbon trash to an EP-approved waste removal provider. Which saved me at least $1,000 in expenses. I loaded the remaining tools, components, and parts scrap onto pallets and had them transferred to the wannabe apartment building. I'm sure he was delighted. The delivery person was a friend of mine who worked for a low fee. He also received the app quite well. It weighed more than 160,000 lbs and included at least 1,000 lbs of pure scrap metal priced at cents per pound. It will cost him more to have it taken away than he will ever receive for it. I covered it in plastic with his name and address in bold letters so that the rain wouldn't destroy it. I would occasionally check her phone to see where she was for the next 2 days. She never left the wannabe's flat. Even when I was aware she was at work. Then her phone vanished. I felt that was unusual. It had been more than a week since I returned the junk to the wannabe. Lisa texted me to meet. I suggested that we meet at the firehouse at 8:00 on Tuesday. Mike informed me that there are meeting rooms available for us to use. I wouldn't have to worry about the wannabe. And Mike would be in the background. I knew it would be safer for both her and me. I arrived at 7:30 and stayed with Mike until Lisa came in her car. There was no sign of the wannabe. But 2 polite and sturdy firefighters greeted her at the car and led her to the firehouse and Mike. He brought her to meet me in the back conference room. Walking in, she sat at the opposite end of the table. I know someone that well. I realized I didn't know her very well. I did not greet her, I just gazed at her. Not saying anything, she appeared uneasy. But I didn't give her at the very least. I would listen to what she had to say. She cleared her throat and added, "Alex, I apologize." Then I stopped her off with, "Stop that right now." Mike placed his hand on my shoulder to calm me down. He said that functioned quietly, "Alex. She has the floor, allow her to express herself, okay?" I heard my pal. I closed my eyes. It took me a minute of stillness to calm down. I eventually nodded yes, opened my eyes and waited. "I am sorry, Alex. Getting connected with Derek just sort of happened. I did not intend for it to happen, but it did." She wiped the tears from her eyes and proceeded. "You were partially correct. I knew him since my first divorce when I went out to clubs with my buddies. He was always attentive to me when he expressed an interest in renting the garage. I didn't expect anything to happen, however. With time things changed." She let out a sob and gazed straight into my eyes. "I was wrong, okay, I was absolutely wrong. There is no reason for this. And there is no way to get it back." I watched Lisa's tears fall for the next 5 minutes. "You were correct, there was no excuse. Once it happened, your wife became a 304. I knew she despised that word. She wasn't pretending with me, I did not expect this." She closed her eyes for a minute to calm herself. "I know you will never trust me again. I'm not even sure if I could ever trust myself again. We must end this marriage as quickly and painlessly as possible. This is the least I could do for you. I'm going to Denver to be close to my sister Nicole, her husband Ben, and their children. I discovered that I could move there from my job. You said to divide everything evenly. I'm fine with that unless you have anything different in mind." She was telling me that our marriage was over. There is no battle, no fury, just air. I think it will hurt others, Lisa. We can sell the house and split the proceeds. And we'll be done. You keep your assets, I keep mine. I do not desire the house or to buy you out of it. Alex. That was supposed to be our home until I did something illegal to you. I believe that jackass he kept promising me that his wife would never have to work so hard. Give up so much. A true man would spoil his wife and do all the nice things for her. She picked up a tissue to wipe her tears. I was played. She wiped her tears again before taking a deep breath. There are evil people in the world. I succumbed into his lies about you, about me. I stopped believing in us after listening to him. She burst into tears and sobbed uncontrollably. What the hell should I do now? 2 years ago, my friend Bill retired to one of Denver's remote suburbs and invited me to visit him and his wife Alicia. It was their second marriage. And he now has 2 grown stepsons, a grown stepdaughter, their wives, and 3 step-grandchildren with another on the way. He was delighted. And I was relieved that my marriage had ended. 3 years ago, we sold the house promptly and shared everything as promised. I can't say we were okay with what happened. But I wasn't as outraged as I had been before. Yes, she did something wrong, but of course, she was seduced by a master finally. She accepted responsibility for her actions and began to consider why. This was likely the most significant to me. I'm still trying to figure out why it was so essential to me. I haven't spoken with or seen her since. Lisa had a bushel basket full of problems that I knew existed. Our divorce made her realize how important it was for her to deal with her personal concerns professionally. Every year, she would send me a Christmas card summarizing what she had discovered about herself. It was rewarding and pleasing to see her finally find happiness in her life. It alleviated my agony and allowed me to see so many things she could now see them too. What I didn't realize was how well she handled them. In any case, the wannabe was relieved that she was 600 miles away from Overland Park. He's had a horrible run of luck. Mike kept up with his firehouse friends. And he told me the inside scoop on the sections no one knew about. Our realtor informed me that he ended up putting in the highest bid on the house by more than 10,000. He outbid 3 others in the second round of bidding. Something tells me he really enjoyed the garage. He got the house. And Lisa and I shared the money as arranged. Her payment was deposited to her account in the Denver suburbs where she lived with her sister Sandy, her husband Ben, and their 2 children, Mary and Mike. I'm still struggling to figure out why someone would name 2 children with the same first letter. I know I'm a bit passive-aggressive, but I couldn't help myself on this one. I did leave the wannabe a couple of small gifts in the house while attempting to sweat a hot water pipe. I was able to build a little drip in one of the walls and add some mold spores to keep the drip company, while removing and repainting the entire piece of drywall. There was nothing to see. The flashing surrounding the chimney passed inspection but failed again after the offer was accepted. A couple of loose, wind-damaged shingles carefully placed below the leak will be a welcome to your new house, which is a present for me. I was having fun thinking about common maintenance procedures that could fail and the long-term cost. I made certain that anything I did would not kill anyone but would just cause inconvenience or a significant financial expense. My pride and pleasure were causing damage to the flashing around the new windows and doors. Unless he got up a ladder, he'd never see the drilled pinholes that let water through the vinyl siding into the wafer board below. With the rain that we get, it will take 5 years for the damage to be obvious. What I knew about the wannabe: he didn't believe in maintenance. I got a little inventive in the garage and rewired the 4 circuits so that a single circuit would cover 90 of the outlets. It was the sole 15-amp circuit, the others were 20 amps. That was done purely for amusement. The best thing that occurred to him began with a new fire department inspection. This is where I obtained the secret information on the wannabe. Mike had recently retired, and the new person was following up on all previously reported concerns. Wannabe was working in the garage as usual, and the grounds had become another fire hazard. He received another ticket. The garage and the grounds were closed. Then there was another official inspection, and he was cited for running a company in a residential neighborhood. 2 weeks later, the garage caught fire. It erupted rapidly into an unmanageable blaze. Strangely, The arson inquiry ruled out the possibility of a spontaneous combustion caused by the rags and hot summer temperatures. They did their best to find it began at the workplace on the futon. Did it spread to the rags on the ground? And what about the walls and rafters? Only a few people were aware of this detail. Staying silent provided an opportunity to discover who sparked the fire. I was in the clear because I was fishing in the Ozarks and attending a couple of performances in Branson. The third component of the fire was that it was July. And Wannabe never watered or mowed his lawn. The 18-inch dry, uncut grass caused the flames to spread to the house and dry vent. The non-clean dry vent was filled with highly flammable dry-lint. And the plastic dry vent pipe ignited in seconds. The fire service was able to salvage part of the house. But it was so badly damaged that it was totaled. When all was said and done, the insurance company refused to pay a cent to the Wannabe, including clean-up costs. Citing twice for fire violations and operating an illegal business in a residential zone. This provided the insurance company with enough grounds to refuse his claim due to negligence. The incorrect storage of chemicals and paints raised the risk of criminal charges. When he withdrew his claims, they began to pursue insurance fraud. Wannabe filed into bankruptcy and moved to Florida. I'm not sure, but I believe the mortgage holders went after the insurance company for something. I say let the big guys fight it out. The neighbors were ecstatic when the city leveled the property and planted grass. Walking into Bill and Alicia's property, I noticed that he now had a big extended family. I realize it was the 4th of July weekend. But at least 50 family members of all ages were hanging out. Talking, playing games, eating and drinking. After the initial 8 introductions, I realized I was lost. I needed name tags. That's the one. I informed them that I'm incredibly good at remembering what people say but not names. So I'm going to nod and grin a lot. I was staying at Motel 6 for 2 nights before heading to the national parks for some tent camping. I made camp arrangements and was heading to an area where I wouldn't have to worry about large beasts. It wouldn't be an enjoyable trip if I was worried about being considered as a potential dinner guest for this gathering. I planned to have fun and hoist a few. Mike informed me that he has a pair of dares to drive me the half-mile back to the accommodation if I am unable to drive. Then he said he'd be annoyed if I wasn't having fun enough and that his father wouldn't have to drive. After a couple of hours of having fun, someone I knew approached me. I didn't know her name, but I swear I had seen her face before. When I wasn't with anyone, she stepped up to me. Her first word was hello. But combining her voice with her face was all I needed to figure out who it was. Hello Nicole, it was Lisa's sister. She shared Lisa's dialect and a strong familial resemblance. We had met briefly at her wedding 7 years ago, which Lisa and I attended. I hadn't seen her in a long time. But Lisa did have a few photos that she would show me when our construction allowed. I was hoping to have a private chat with you. I understand that this is probably at the top of your list. Right close to an unmedicated root canal, she smiled. And I chuckled, sure, why not, I just had my. And I ended with a throwaway sentence. I've often remarked that my heart has been ripped out. And that I've clearly lost my mind. But the serious expression on her face stopped me. I knew she was being honest. There are a few chairs over by the fence. Could I get you a refill on your drink? And I will do the same. Why don't we hit the coolers together? She paused. Thank you for what have I done? I did, Alex, you are listening to me. And I think you understand my seriousness. She grabbed a Coors Light and I flinched. Bathwater. I have to sit with you and watch you sip the bathwater. At the very least, she shook her head, laughing. Try the Fat Tire, it's a Foot Collins that is local. She stared at the New Belgium amber ale I was holding before reaching for my suggested drink as we headed to the chairs by the fence. She questioned, are you always so difficult? Nah. Not really, but I have my beer standards. And I giggled. She sat down and I got serious. How's Lisa doing? I get her Christmas cards and her notes on what she's learned about herself. But that's all I know. She's sending you. She has not told me. Nicole hesitated and then resumed. First and foremost, she is unaware that you are present. Hell, I had no idea you were here. She is aware of Captain Mike's presence. But that's about all. She has undergone significant adjustments since moving here. She began dealing with the sexual abuse that occurred while she was in high school. And what constitutes sexual abuse? Has she never told you? I nodded no and asked for her to proceed. There was an instructor at the school. He played her really well until a janitor discovered something in his garbage bin and caught him. They let him go and arranged for counseling for his victims. Back then there were two. The trick was the second one. She was 14. That would explain a lot about Lisa, who was previously married to her first husband that nearly killed her. My jaw fell. Nicole, she never told me that. She simply mentioned that during their battle, he gave her a case of crabs. So what else don't I know about her? She improved so dramatically that she began to fight back. I nodded for her to proceed with her work. She complained about sexual harassment by a company officer. She was unable to completely substantiate it in court with their counsel. They planned to sweep it under the carpet. That's when another 4 ladies arrived with their testimonies. And it was taken to corporate. He ended up with his walking papers and a gold parachute that turned out to be. The corporation settled and fired the individuals who were protecting him. Excuse me, this is Lisa. This is the woman who would fade into the background if there was a fight with anyone. It's not all roses, but it's a great start. She also repaid Derek for what he had done to her and to you. She set fire to the futon and he lost everything. How do you know this for sure, silly? I drove her there. Then I observed as she set up one of his spare cigarettes and oily rags on the futon. I started it soon. She utilized the spare key you gave her after the locks were changed to access some of her belongings in the garage. I bet you forgot about it. That in itself never changed the locks. You are aware that there is an arson investigation going on. The case remains open. You realize you're the third person in the world who knows who did it. What else is happening with Lisa? She's been a wonderful aunt and babysitter to my children. She goes to treatment religiously, as well as to religion for therapy. She chuckled. Does this help? She took a big drink of the beer and then made a questioning expression. There is no unpleasantness or happiness. Only questioning. I'm not sure. But you could have altered my mind about beer. After setting the bottle down, she proceeded. When she was mistreated by that teacher, she rid her first spouse. An 8 out of 10 on a screwed up scale of 0 to 10. It was 9 out of 10 when you first met her. She was ranked 7th out of 10. I nodded. When you got married and until then you rented your garage. She scored a 5 out of 10. You were pretty good to her. I'm not sure if I ever thanked you for that. I admired how she changed for the better. I could feel the sorrow welling up in me. Nicole reached over and pulled my beer away, holding my hands as a couple of tears streamed down my unkempt beard-covered cheeks. It's okay, Alex, please hang with me. I nodded affirmatively and waited. On the day you both went to the firehouse and decided to split up, she informed you briefly what had transpired. She told you Derek was evil. He appears to have used the same techniques on her as the teacher did in high school. We both knew she was frail. And the son of a witch was a genius at plugging her back in. It's incredible how they do it. Yet a tear fell down her cheek. That scumsucker preyed on her for 3 months. He was quite crafty with subtitles anyway. You two were getting the house together and lost sight of each other when she lowered her hand. I raised mine. I know, I've been there too. Ben and I spent 6 months rebuilding our relationship with an LCSW. I was the witch wife. And he was the mistreated husband. People do wrong. Sometimes we can work better together. Sometimes we can do better alone. Ben and I performed better together. You and Trick needed to be separated. I reflected on what she had said and where she was headed. What do you want from me? Isn't this the 64,000 question? I do not know. I didn't realize you'd be here. You were not on anyone's radar. Trick never mentioned contacting you. I honestly don't know. All I know is that when I saw you, all I wanted to inform you that my sister is not the same as Derek. She returned to a screwed-up 9 out of 10. It's funny as in funny strange. She was a 6 out of 10 when she first arrived here. I genuinely believe you're treating her well. As much as you could assist her reset herself. The 3 years of therapy and returning to church have made a difference. What do you want from me? I still do not know. I doubt I ever will. What matters is that I exist because of you getting my sister back. She's been addressing a lot of her problems. So what I'm actually saying is thank you. Thank you from the heart. We sat there in silence until I heard another familiar voice. I'd like to thank you too. It was Lisa. She stood there, tears in her eyes and shaking. I suddenly stood up, knocking over my beer. Nicole's too, oh hell. It slipped out of my mouth before I understood what I was saying. I reached out and took Lisa's hand. How long have you stood there? Approximately 30 seconds after you both sat down. Then I wanted to stay at home with the kids. And because the dogs can't handle the fireworks. He told me to attend the party. Lisa, could you be interested in any of the new Belgian beers? I recommend a great fat tire, but there are others. I seem to have corrupted your sister to consume significantly more tasty beers. And I'd appreciate the opportunity to do the same with you. Without waiting for a response, I took her hand. And we marched over to the coolers. It was two people who were eager to see where it might lead. I hope you enjoyed that story. Here is another one. It was 5:30 p.m. And my wife of 19 years, Caroline, had not arrived home from work or called. She was usually home before 5:00. Her hours as the executive assistant to Janice Ferrell of Ferrell International were 8:00 a.m. Caroline had worked for Michael Ferrell before his death 2 years ago. And when his daughter Janice took over, she maintained Caroline as her personal assistant. Tommy was already home from school and upstairs in his room, finishing up his homework so he could spend some quality time in front of the TV after dinner. By 5:45, I was concerned and dialed Elaine's cell phone. But it went straight to voicemail. I had just left her a note to contact me when she walked in the door carrying many bags from Antonio's Italian restaurant. On her way to the kitchen, she kissed my cheek before leaving, saying, "Sorry, honey. I had to stay a little late and hadn't taken anything out of the freezer for supper. So I stopped by Antonio's. I hope that's okay." "Sure," I said, but I was becoming concerned. "Why haven't you called?" "I failed to charge my phone last night. And when I got in my car to call you, I discovered it had died." One of my minor pet peeves with Caroline was that her phone was nearly always turned off, dead or silent. So I could rarely reach her when she was out. When I complained, Mom always said, "You're right, hun. I will make it a priority to do better." She would recall for a few days. But then everything returned to normal. It's frustrating, but I've learned to deal with it. Caroline was in a nasty mood throughout dinner. But the conversation was dominated by our 7th grade son, who was thrilled about impending baseball tryouts and how unfair his math teacher, Mrs. Fielding, was with the amount of homework she required. We always let Tommy monopolize the television until 9:00 p.m. bedtime approached. But we had already decided that he would not have a television in his room, which he regularly complained about. There was also no television in our room, as it could distract us from our primary reason for being there, which was to sleep or have sex. The latter we accomplished at least 4 times per week. So we were an outlier among our friends and neighbors as a 1-TV household. Some were so addicted to the tube that they kept one in the kitchen. Sam and Caroline Sullivan may be able to provide some context to the story by providing some biographical information about themselves. I will start with myself. I retired last year at the age of 50 as a patrol sergeant with the county police department, thanks to the state retirement system, which allowed military veterans to buy back their service time and add it to their police retirement. I was able to count my 4 years as an Army Ranger toward my 25-year retirement requirement. That meant that I and other military veterans could contribute the same amount of money to the retirement system as the county and use that time to our retirement years. The demands of police work, along with the physicality of my part-time employment, Left my 5 feet 10 inches physique with very little body fat. In the period since my retirement, I've transformed my part-time handyman job into a full-time contracting firm with the relationships I'd formed over the years while working on little house improvements. I do not need to advertise. My reputation for outstanding work precedes me, and recommendations assure a steady flow of work. My wife Caroline, who will be 45 years old next month, was 25 when we married and I was 31 at the time. Just starting my police career. The details of our courtship are irrelevant. We met at a mutual friend's party, and I was immediately smitten. She had and still has shoulder-length wavy brown hair, blue eyes, a fascinating smile, and at 5 feet 8 inches. She is the same size 8 as when we met. Aside from her beautiful beauty and appealing shape, I believe it was her bubbly demeanor that drew me in. My wife can be a little naive about people's methods of operation, but that could be due to the cynicism that most cops develop over time. As an executive assistant for a mid-sized international corporation, she earns a solid living, which I supplement with my increasing income as a private contractor. We are financially comfortable as best friends. We also respect one another, and our marriage and relationship have always been based on equality. We share parental tasks, including cooking and housework, of course. Some duties are gender-related. She does not do yard work, and I do not go near her laundry room. I learned that lesson the hard way while attempting to be a helpful husband. I damaged several of her nice blouses since I didn't know how to separate colors correctly. Tommy had gone to the living room to watch TV, and I was helping Caroline clear the table and load the dishwasher. Normally after cleaning up in the kitchen, we would have coffee before heading into the den to talk or read. This night was no exception, and as my wife placed a cup of coffee in front of me, she casually stated, "Come." H was promoted to head up our London office, and if it's all right with you, we were planning to go out to dinner and dance tomorrow night. To be honest, I didn't pay much attention to Elaine's work friends, so I didn't remember Connie. But in order to avoid being indifferent, I didn't bring it up. The dance element piqued my interest, and I had several questions about it. She said cheerfully, "We both enjoy dancing, and I rarely get the chance because you dislike dancing and admit to being born with 2 left feet. Will you just dance together?" I inquired. "Of course," she responded, "and it would only be for a few hours. I'll be home by 11. I wasn't thrilled, but because she never went out with the gals as many of our friends' spouses do, I gave in the following evening. Caroline returned home from work. She inquired about the supper I had arranged for Tommy and myself. Chicken pot pie. I spoke with some authority. My son and I enjoy pot pies, but Elle despised them and often chastised me about the excessive sodium level and calorie count. She grimaced at my response and shook her head in defeat. "Connie will pick me up at 7:00, she added. "So I'm going upstairs to shower and change, while you all poison yourself." Tommy had gone to his friend Jason's place on Saturday with the instruction to return home for dinner by 7:30 when the pot pies would be ready. At 6:50 the doorbell rang, expecting to see Elaine's girlfriend. When I answered the door, I was surprised to discover a well-dressed man about 35, tall with blonde wavy hair. The first thing that came to me was that he was a salesman or worse, a Jehovah's Witness. But I remembered that Jehovah's Witnesses typically went in pairs. He shattered both of my expectations when he extended his hand and said, "Hello, you must be Sam. Caroline mentions you frequently. I'm Daniel Hunter. I must thank you for allowing me to accompany Caroline this evening. I believe she informed you that I will be departing this week to head up our London office. And your wife has been an amazing help to me over the last 2 years. So I wanted to express my gratitude." All of this was stated in a couple of seconds. Yet his eyes appeared to be judging me, and the comments were delivered with a sense of superiority and condescension. My wits returned. I answered, "Well, Daniel, they'll have to call me Connie," he said pleasantly. "Everyone does, hey? The house does not have to fall on me." When I finally made the link, I continued more strongly, "Well, Connie, I believe there was some miscommunication here. Give me a moment while I chat with my wife. I climbed the stairs fast but with as much dignity as a prospective can muster when I entered our bedroom. Caroline had just finished arranging her dress and was looking at herself in a full-length mirror. She was dressed in a black cocktail dress, which, while not provocative, was far from conservative. She grabbed her red leather clutch, which matched her 4-inch red high heels, and turned to me smiling, saying, "I heard the doorbell, I think that's Connie." How do I look? I didn't respond. But the expression of rage and incredulity on my face must have led her to inquire, "What's up, Sam? You appear agitated," I yelled, upset. My wife wants to go on a date with a young man who wishes to make me his. So no, I'm not concerned, I'm astounded, I'm irritated. And ashamed that there's a man waiting downstairs in my house for my wife to join him for a romantic evening. And unless he's queer, he intends to get into your trousers. When her hands reached her hips, I knew the talk was not done. And it was not going to end nicely. I could tell by her lack of a quick response that she was calming herself, preparing for a verbal assault with about as much rage in her voice as I had ever seen. She eventually spoke, "Well, Sam, I am the one who is surprised and irritated. First and foremost, you have essentially accused me of being a 304, thinking I'd let another man entice and have sex with me. Your inference is more than offensive, it's hurtful. Second, I've worked with Connie for 2 years, and he has always been a gentleman. He has never hit on me or said anything." She grabbed her purse and moved forcefully towards the door. "I will not keep him standing alone while you make a fool of yourself. I'll be home at 11 and hopefully you'll have pulled your head out of your buttocks by then." I was stunned as I watched her descend the steps. Now, from Caroline's viewpoint, I can't remember ever being this angry. Sam and I have a marriage built on mutual love and trust, and I couldn't believe what my 19-year-old spouse had just intimated. Apparently, the respect and trust one felt we shared was one-sided. Connie could tell I was unhappy when I gave him a kiss on the cheek. He inquired whether everything was all right. I mustered a smile and answered, "Absolutely. Are we ready?" I looked back up the steps as Connie placed his hand on the small of my back and led me through the entrance to his car. Then back to Sam. I was standing at the top of the landing, watching my wife stretch her head up, kiss her date, then briefly look up at me with what I imagined to be a smirk. He then placed his arm around her waist and led her through the door. I was angry, not only with Caroline but also at myself for not being more demanding that she not go out, since if she did, she was disrespecting our marriage and jeopardizing our relationship. As I reflected on yesterday's chat when she informed me about her plans to go to dinner and dancing with a colleague, I wondered whether she purposefully avoided using the words he, him, and is just the name Connie. It seemed improbable that someone could avoid using at least one of those pronouns, which I have to think was a deliberate ruse to trick me. Surely she didn't expect me to recall a 5-second introduction from a packed business party nearly a year ago. Meanwhile, Caroline and Daniel were in a car together. Connie was making small chat, but I was still so irritated with Sam that I missed much of what he was saying. I noticed my thoughts had gone when he asked, "Well, what do you think, oh Connie?" I said, "I apologize, my mind wandered for a second." "It's okay," he said. "I asked you what you thought of having dinner at the Chop House. It's at the Marriott, and there's a terrific dance club, which has forced me to forget about my recent marital conflict." I responded, "That sounds lovely. I've never been there, but I've heard positive things about it." He stared at me quizzically before reaching over to squeeze my hand, which was lying on my thigh. She asked, "Is everything okay, hun? You appeared agitated when you came downstairs, and my brief interaction with your spouse led me to believe he was not on board with our date." The use of the phrases "horn" and "date," as well as his grasping my hand, caught my attention but did not raise any warning lights. After all, I've known this man for 2 years, and many men use the term porn to refer to their female friends on dates. Well, in a general sense it was, but not in the way Sam was understanding it. "You're correct," I said. I figured Sam recognized you from the party. Especially since he had innocently inquired later that evening about who I had been dancing with. Thinking back, I may not have used the name Connie. And possibly as Daniel put it. I simply do not remember. I suppose when you showed up, he realized Connie was not the girlfriend he had expected and got the wrong idea. Listen, hun, he murmured sympathetically. If you want to change your mind about this evening, I completely understand. I'll be sad since not only do you look great, but I was hoping to spend a few hours dancing with you. Absolutely not, I responded. Perhaps more fiercely than I had intended. I'm looking forward to a lovely supper and admiring your dancing abilities, which I must say are exceptional. Unfortunately, Sam has 2 left feet and only does a few perfunctory dances with me when we go out. I didn't want to turn Connie off, so I spoke with a charming smile and a courteous tone. However, I am a married woman, and I promise to get home by midnight. I am yours. And until then, I recall telling Sam 11. But that was before he ticked me off. Connie gave me a sparkling smile and this time, reaching over and briefly caressing my knee, said, "Good, let's just go have a good time. And I'll make sure Cinderella gets home before the stroke of 12. Back at home, Sam was with his son Tommy, and I ate our pot pies, but for the first time, I didn't like mine. My son inquired as to what time his mother would return home, having previously been informed by me that she was going out to supper with a girlfriend. I saw no need to embarrass myself by describing how his dumb father had permitted his mother to go on a date with a man. That's exactly how I viewed myself. As a foolish cook, the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Tom's bedtime was increased by 1 hour on weekends, so this would ordinarily be a 10:00 night. But honestly, I didn't want to be sitting alone, staring at the 4 walls, waiting for my wife to return home, so I granted him an additional hour. However, at 11:00, I sent him to bed with a hug. He was too elderly to give a kiss. I know he felt ashamed. I took up my position in the living room, watching a muted television and hoping to hear a car in the driveway. My rage had only grown, and I planned to have a serious conversation with Caroline when she returned. I was confident their relationship was professional, but a married woman would not go out dining and dancing with another man. At least not with my married woman. Despite what I stated earlier, I trusted Caroline, but not the jerk she went out with. Perhaps it was my cop instinct or simply the instinct of a jealous husband with a beautiful wife. In any case, his gentlemanly demeanor couldn't conceal the wolf behind his eyes, and I simply hoped that my Red Riding Hood wouldn't be misled by the sheep's attire. At 11:30, I resisted the impulse to phone Caroline's cell, but by 11:45 I couldn't resist anymore. I was aware that her initial assertion of home by 11 had evolved into around 11. However, I completely expected her to respond and say she was on her way. But once again the call went to voicemail. And I did not leave a message because the call went straight to voicemail. Her phone must have been switched off on purpose, which further added to my frustration. Meanwhile, Caroline was loving her date. We had a fantastic supper at the Chop House, preceded by a few of Cosmos for me and beer for Connie. I can't say I wasn't smitten by his praises on how fortunate my husband was to have such a gorgeous, charming and sexy wife. When I mentioned my age in discussion, he boosted my ego even more by saying that he assumed I had married an older man and that I didn't appear a day older than 35. Women enjoy flattery and I was no exception. I had almost forgotten about my disagreement with Sam and was excited to dance with Connie. The band was fantastic, and we danced practically continuously for an hour. We only sat when a slow song began to play, and I gently moved us off the floor when the band took a break. I excused myself to visit the ladies' room, and when I returned, Connie had a fresh Cosmo for me and a beer for himself. I was thirsty after dancing and perhaps drank it faster than usual because when the band resumed playing and we returned to the dance floor, I felt a little queasy. A few songs into their set, a slow song began, and I couldn't stop listening when Connie took me into his arms. That number was followed by another slow melody. And I was relieved to hang on to him because the effects of the last drink had left me wobbly on my feet and a little dizzy. Connie saw my concern and proposed that we sit out a few numbers. I had barely noticed his touch on my buttocks as he led us to our booth. Or the fact that he sat next to me rather than across from me, as he had done previously back at home. Sam was becoming impatient by 1:00 a.m. I'd called Elaine's phone 5 times and left 3 messages. The last message was to Caroline: if this is about punishing me, I get your argument. But I expect you to call me back right away. If I don't hear from you within the next half hour, I'll go to bed and set the deadbolt, so you can spend the night with your lover, knowing you've ruined a wonderful marriage and a lovely family. I was beyond pissed, and my imagination was beginning to wreak havoc with me. 1:30 came and went, but I did not go to bed. I sat in the living room, wondering if I would get married in the morning. Meanwhile, Caroline was with Daniel. I felt Connie's hand leave mine and begin to caress the inside of my thigh. But I was powerless to move, although knowing I was becoming aroused. I attempted to speak, but even my ability to form words was impaired. And I was embarrassed that I had become so inebriated. Part of my head was telling me to stop, but another part of me was enjoying it. I barely recall a fragmented voice speaking to me, followed by a muscular hand assisting me out of the booth. I remember the voice saying, "Honey, I think you should lie down for a while. You seem a little under the weather." There was an arm around me, keeping me upright and guiding me there. I vaguely recall being in an elevator but not knowing where I was heading. When I entered a different room, I noticed a bed and knew I needed to lie down. I wasn't fatigued, but my limbs were unresponsive, and my mind was perplexed. I heard some indistinct calming words, and then Sam's lips touched mine soon. I felt cold air strike my naked body. From the corner of my eyes, I saw my clothing laying in a heap on the floor. He simply climbed on top of me and took me. When I opened my eyes slightly, they instinctively closed. I noticed a face with blue eyes looking into mine as he continued to have sex with me. "No, not Sam," my mind screamed, but no words came out. When my mouth opened, my body shook with a tremendous climax. Meanwhile, Sam was in panic mode at 5:00 a.m. After numerous more unanswered phone calls, I finally lay down in my bed and slipped into a tired, fitful slumber, knowing that our marriage was on the verge of dissolution. There could be no reason for her flagrant treachery, and I would never forgive her. Just after 7:00 a.m. my phone rang and I thought it was Elaine. I was tempted not to respond because there was nothing she could say to undo the damage she had done. However, after checking the caller ID, I noticed that it was a number I didn't recognize. So I pushed the accept button and groggily said, "Hello, is this Jojo Sullivan?" said the voice on the other end. As I realized that it was, I had a bad feeling in my gut that someone was calling to inform me of the catastrophic event that I hadn't given any thought to just a few hours earlier. The speaker said, "Sam, this is Terry Connor. Remember me?" Terry was one of the newer patrol officers under my supervision when I retired. He was an ex-Marine and a fine cop, more streetwise and knowledgeable than some of his friends who had never been in the military. "Of course, Terry," I said, my voice filled with dread. "What is the matter?" He seemed to hesitate but eventually asked, "Is your wife home?" I began to fear the worst when I said no. She went out to supper with a co-worker yesterday night and was scheduled to return home by 11:00 p.m. I've been unable to reach her. All of my calls went to voicemail. "Is she okay?" I asked in a trembling voice. "Yes and no. Sam, she's in Mercy Hospital. She came to the ER on her own, stating she had been sexually attacked." I answered the phone, but all she would say was her name and that her husband had been a cop. "And she refused to speak to anyone but you. She has no evident physical injuries, but the doctors performed blood tests and are currently testing her with a sexual assault kit. I'm sorry to be the one to inform you, but I believe you should come down here as soon as possible. I'm going to have to call this into the dicks." But I wanted to let you know. How long will it take you to get here? 15 minutes was my abrupt response. Okay, Sam. I'd typically have to go back on patrol once the dicks arrived. But I'll hold off for a while so you can arrive before they do. Thank you, Terry, I said. Truly, I'll get there as quickly as possible. My first thinking was that I'm going to kill the maggot. I didn't want to wake Tommy. But I could let him wake up in an empty house not understanding what was going on. I went into his bed and gently shook him awake, saying, "Listen, son, wake up." He massaged his eyes and appeared dazed. But I continued fast because I had little time. Tommy's mom was involved in a minor traffic accident. She is fine. But she is being checked out at the hospital as a precaution. So I need to head down there with her insurance information. I just did not want you to wake up to an empty house. Like I mentioned, she's fine, no cuts or broken bones. So don't worry, get back to sleep. I will be returning soon. His countenance was concerned, but he whispered okay, Dad, and laid his head back down. My hands were shaking so severely that I had difficulty inserting the key into the ignition. Meanwhile, Caroline was deep in meditation at the hospital. I awoke with an urgent need to defecate but was still confused and bewildered. The bathroom nightlight provided such weak illumination in the otherwise dark room. I got out of bed and moved towards the light. My thinking was beginning to clear enough that I realized I was not in my own home. Sitting on the bowl, I realized it wasn't the want to go that woke me up, it was discomfort in my rectum because, as I cleaned myself, I noticed blood on the toilet paper. And that's when I understood I was done in there. As I sat on the bowl, memories of the previous evening began to flood back into my mind. And the notion of what I had likely been subjected to made me nauseated. And I began to retch. I barely had time to swivel around and drop to my knees before the vomiting started when there was nothing left in my stomach to spew into the bowl. I leaned against the bathroom vanity, staring at a woman I didn't recognize. My eyes were bloodshot, there were bite marks on my shoulder and neck. And my hair was matted and stiff in places where it could only be drawn with semen. The shame and remorse washed over me like a rogue wave on the beach, knocking me down and pulling me under. I could not endure looking at the woman in the mirror any longer. She didn't look like the confident, happy wife and loving mother I expected to see. Still leaning against the counter, my head sagged, and my tears started. When I was finally able to gaze up at the awful image before me, I realized that my naive idiocy and intractable stubbornness had cost me my self-respect, the loss of my husband, and most likely my son's respect. If I had a knife or a pistol, I would have killed the son of a who had taken my life for his own sexual enjoyment. How could I have gotten so drunk, I wondered. But when I reflected on what I could remember, I realized that I had only had 3 drinks, 2 in the restaurant and 1 in the club. Maybe that was enough for a tiny buzz, but not enough to cause me to lose control. He drugged me. I spoke it out, that filthy maggot had put something in my drink. When I walked into the room and saw him sleeping naked on his back, I knew what I wanted to do. I imagined tearing his eyeballs out, ripping his balls off and biting off his tool. But I knew I didn't have the physical strength to do it. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and I set out quickly and discreetly to do it. I dressed silently with a final look of absolute contempt at a creature I once respected. I snuck out of the room. Meanwhile, Sam had arrived at the hospital. I arrived at the emergency department in just under 15 minutes. And Terry was there for me as promised. Because of the early hour, there were not many individuals in the waiting room. "Where is she?" I nearly demanded as I walked towards the curtained cubicles. Terry abruptly stopped me by placing a hard palm on my chest and shouting, "Hold on, Sam, she's sleeping." They administered a sedative to relax her. She was quite funny. "The investigators will arrive in a few minutes. Take advantage of this opportunity to clarify your story." "Is there a straight story?" I said fiercely. "What do you mean, is there a straight story?" Terry still had the appearance and physique of a Marine. And despite my good physical condition, he was 15 years younger and clearly stronger. He placed his hand under my arm and squeezed my bicep, leading me to a nook away from any inquisitive ears. Listen, Sam, I am on your side here. I don't know your marital status. And I don't want to know. What I do know is that around 4:45 this morning, your wife arrived by cab, claiming to have been assaulted. They'll want to know where you were, why she wasn't at home with her family, who she was with, and how it was she arrived dressed for an evening out. She refused to answer the questions I posed. All she would say was, I won't talk to anyone except my husband. Out of respect for you, I didn't read the inquiry. But the dicks will. All I'm saying is that you should gather your ideas in order to maybe reduce the repercussions for you and your family. Before I could thank Terry, two events occurred simultaneously. Two dicks appeared in the air dock and approached us. One of the investigators was male, while the other was a female whom I did not recognize. I knew the guy because we'd been to several crime scenes together. Harvey Burke was an old-school cop with around 30 years of experience. Harvey pulled back when he saw the doctor approaching me. And when the female cop continued to walk, he placed a hand on her shoulder and said quietly. She did not appear pleased, but she paused. The doctor inquired if I was the patient's husband. And I noticed that he did not refer to me as the victim's husband. Terry had stroked my back and was heading for the exit. The doctor then talked with a little Midwestern accent. Hello, Mr. Sullivan, my name is Dr. Nadel. Your wife has no apparent injuries. I say noticeable because there was some tearing of her rectum, which will not require surgery and should heal rapidly. There are a few bite marks, often known as hickeys, on both breasts, but they do not require treatment. My heart plummeted, and a wave of dizziness swept over me as I imagined Elaine being screwed into her body and mauled by that low-life parasite. We performed a sexual intercourse exam, the doctor explained, and there was semen in both her vagina and anus. Her hair also contained dried semen, indicating recent sexual activity. Blood was drawn to test for alcohol and drugs, however. The results are still pending, of course. The presence of semen in both cavities indicates recent sexual activity. And until the blood test results are in, that is all I can tell you or the investigators. I was getting irritated by his use of language, which showed he was not convinced of the lack of consent. Sexual encounters differed greatly from sexual assaults. However, he proceeded. Your wife has refused to answer any questions about the incident other than claiming she was drugged before it happened and insisting on speaking only to you. I don't see any reason to admit her right now, but I'd prefer to delay her release until the blood testing is completed. Until then, I'll be better able to make a final decision. She was given a small sedative to calm her agitation, but she is now awake and you can see her. Have you got any queries, Mr. Sullivan? I shook my head and said no. Well, he said if you have any questions you can page me. I hope to have the results in about an hour and will consult with you then. He left without offering a single condolence or word of sympathy. I began to walk into the cubicle area when the female detective, a short brunette with a pinched face and closed eyes, stood in front of me, blocking my route. My immediate instinct was to push her out of the path, but she spoke authoritatively before I could respond. I apologize, Mr. Sullivan, but my partner and I need to meet with your wife first for the time being. This is a criminal inquiry, and we require a statement. I turned to see Harry, who was approaching and shaking his head in annoyance, before telling her firmly, let it go, Anderson. Sam can go in and see his wife for a few minutes. Then we will conduct the interview. Embarrassed to have been overruled, her cheeks flushed and she answered indignantly, Harvey, you understand the rules. If we let the husband in, he could taint the case by coaching or working with his wife on her statement, which could be used as evidence in a trial. Sandra Anderson, a 27-year-old college graduate with less than 5 years on the job and less than 1 year in the detective division, had a huge hook in the form of an uncle who was the deputy mayor when I first joined the department. There were only a few female cops, and one rarely saw one, most if not all. had been taken under the wing of a superior officer and assigned to secretarial positions that kept them out of harm's way. It may sound sexist, but I am aware of some luxurious assignments offered to female cops in exchange for sexual favors. One such situation concerned an officer in my precinct whose wife, upon graduation from the academy, was immediately appointed as an aide to a deputy chief. She was a really pretty blonde with large breasts. I couldn't understand why her spouse was never suspicious. However, it turned out that he believed the chief was doing him a favor by keeping his wife off the street. Several months into her work, the husband was assigned to drop off evidence at the police lab, which was located in the basement of our headquarters building. When he entered the boss's fourth-floor office, he intended to surprise his wife by bringing her to lunch. He was unhappy to see her desk unoccupied and assumed he'd missed her. However, he decided to check with the chief in case she was simply somewhere else in the building. When he entered the office, he saw his wife in a passionate embrace with the chief's hand inside her open blouse and her hand caressing him. Unfortunately, his initial instinct was to draw his firearm and threaten to kill both of them. Fortunately, he was clever enough not to pull the trigger and instead clubbed the chief over the head before slapping the heck out of his wife. After the dust settled, the spouse was compelled to retire rather than face assault charges. The deputy chief was forced to retire, and the wife was unexpectedly relocated to another division and promoted to detective a year later. But that was then and this is now, when sexual harassment in the workplace is a common buzzword. The number of women joining the military has surged rapidly. Although blatant sexual liaisons have halted, women continue to receive the majority of plain clothes and detective missions. Harvey responded sarcastically, "Look, Anderson, I started creating criminal collars before you were born. And as the lead detective I will make the decisions. Sam Sullivan is a co-worker, retired or not. You deserve some professional civility. If that bothers you, you can wait for me in the cafeteria or simply sit in the car and feel free to report me. I need an excuse to retire anyway." Detective Anderson turned and went away. When Harvey was out of earshot, he muttered to no one in particular, "Goddamn affirmative action. She couldn't find any gamblers at a poker game. Go ahead, Sam. I'll give you 15 minutes as I finish some paperwork from our previous call." When I pushed back the curtain to Elaine's cubicle, she turned her head and began to sob when she realized it was me. I pulled up a chair and sat silently, allowing her to recover, of course. Seeing her in such distress made me feel sympathy. But I was still angry rather than empathetic. She had tricked me by deliberately not referring to the asshole's gender and allowed me to answer the door, hoping that by not telling me, she would reduce the amount of time for conflict. Caroline was trying to explain the problem to her husband. I couldn't look my husband in the eyes, so I turned my head and began to cry. I had longed for him to be at my side, but now I didn't know what to say. How do I apologize for ignoring his protests and concerns and allowing a sexual predator to treat me like a piece of meat in public? I realized it was a date. Regardless of how innocent my intentions were, I had gone out to eat and dance with a man who was not my spouse. While lying there, I thought about how I would have responded if the scenario had been reversed and Sam had told me he was going out with Andy, who turned out to be Andrea, a younger, more attractive woman whom he wanted to reward for some reason. I knew the answer and it scared me. Sam's voice jolted me from my nightmares when he stated, "Caroline, the detectives will be in here shortly to take a statement from you. So be prepared that some of the questions will be embarrassing and intrusive. However, if you claim that the intercourse was due to your mental incapacity as a result of drugs or excessive alcohol, you should simply respond truthfully. I must warn you, Caroline, that if you attempt to deceive them in any manner, they will know. The lead investigator has over 30 years of experience and is an expert interrogator. He will see through any attempt at dishonesty." He spoke in such a detached tone that the only words that stuck with me were claim and potential deception. Aside from that, he hadn't touched me. He spoke without sympathy and sounded more like a damned lawyer than my spouse. Even through my tears I felt my rage rising. And ultimately looking at him I snapped, "Sam, you don't seem to believe me. I wouldn't talk to anyone until you arrived because you've known me for over 20 years and understand that while what I did was stupid, I never planned to have sex. I didn't expect to be sexually raped by someone I respected and considered a friend. Damn you, Sam, I was not seduced by that monster. I had been drugged and used. I suppose you don't see it that way though. So why don't you simply leave and go hang out with your cop friends?" I turned away angry, almost crying, as I heard his chair scrape across the tile floor. And without more word, the privacy curtain opened and closed. I knew he'd gone, possibly for good. Meanwhile, Sam was still attempting to suppress his feelings when I returned to the waiting area. Harvey gave me a curious look. His enraged companion was sitting on the other side of the room, arms folded over her muscular chest, and scowl on her face. "Thank you, Harvey," I answered, truly knowing he may get caught up in what he had just done for me. "You can enter now, but just to be clear." I purposefully generated an angry response from her. "And I believe she is speaking the truth," he nodded. And with a nonverbal indication to his partner, she trudged into the cubicle behind him. Harry and his buddy have not to appear after almost 45 minutes. When I spotted Dr. Nadel peering around the now crowded waiting room, he noticed me. He motioned for me to follow him, and we entered a small exam room down the hall from the ER. After we were both seated, he addressed me in a less clinical tone than before, indicating that the lab tests had come back and revealed a significant level of rohypnol and ketamine in her blood. "As a former police officer, I'm sure you're aware that these are usually referred to as date rape medications. And when combined, they have the effect of decreasing inhibitions and enhancing libido while also partially paralyzing the body's communication capabilities between the brain and muscles. This makes resistance challenging if not impossible." I stated this to the detectives and provided a copy of the chemical analysis. "I've begun in 4 to help speed up the purging of her system. But she'll be able to leave in about 3 hours." He stood up and offered his hand, saying, "I'm sorry you and your wife have to go through this. But given the circumstances, I believe that time and possibly some counseling will help her and you fully recover." He started to turn to leave. I stood and asked, "Doctor, may I ask you a few questions?" He appeared uneasy, having performed what he considered his formal role as attending physician, but nodded unwillingly. I believe he anticipated my queries, which added to his uneasiness. "I understand the medicines and their effects, but I'd like to know if they prohibit a woman from enjoying sexual pleasure." He let out an audible sigh and motioned for me to seat as he returned to his chair, stating in a patient but not unsympathetic tone, "Mr. Sullivan, I cannot give you a definitive response, but I can state that when a body's sexual organs are adequately stimulated, the body can respond but the brain may not. So the body's reaction is entirely physiological. In situations like this, there may be no voluntary mental or emotional participation." To respond to your veiled query about if your wife experienced climax, yes, it is certainly feasible. Even victims who were not drugged but were brutally attacked reported experiencing climaxes. Actually, the fact that their body betrayed them and they derive sexual pleasure from an undesired experience frequently adds to their misery. Remember that whether medicated or physically pushed, the reaction is involuntary, just like it is to pain. He stroked my shoulder, stood and went away, perhaps relieved that I hadn't asked him any more uncomfortable questions. I hadn't observed Harvey and his partner standing near the door to the treatment area, evidently waiting for the doctor to go. As Harvey approached me, his companion looked at me with less hatred than before but chose not to join us, preferring to let Harvey deliver whatever good or bad news he had. He began by saying, "Sam, you have 20 years of police experience, so I am not going to insult your intelligence by outlining our procedures. First and foremost, I want to express my condolences to you and your wife. Between her statement and the laboratory report, I have no doubt she was drugged, and because she was unable to give consent, She was effectively abused when she went to the ladies' room. The Pope most likely slipped her a Mickey. She was fully unaware of his intentions and does not recollect much of the assault. Now for the difficult part. It kills me to say it. And if I said it to a stranger, it would be a major breach of procedure, potentially leading to criminal charges. For the sake of your family and particularly your wife, I would not advocate looking into accusations against this scoundrel. I began to object, but he interrupted me by rapidly interjecting. Hear me out, Sam. Whatever decision you make, I will support you. You understand better than most people how corrupt our justice system can be. If the jerk hires a quality lawyer, he will first bring up the fact that your wife went on a date with this person on purpose. Yeah, I know she unintentionally surprised you. She described the circumstances in detail. But to a jury, the fact that she went out for dinner, drinks, and dancing would go a long way toward her acquittal regarding the medicines. The defense will argue that she took them voluntarily in order to reduce her inhibitions. Sam, there is existing case law on this, both in this jurisdiction and across the country. Some women have used these medications on themselves. They'll also say that when she discovered how much time had passed while she was in the room, she realized her marriage was in risk. So she made up a narrative and went to the hospital to cover her faults and save her marriage. I don't need to tell you how cutthroat attorneys can be. They will drag you both through the mud. And the local press will paint you as a permissive husband and her as a promiscuous wife and thus a bad mother. Your son will face penalties from his classmates. Finally, the douchebag will most likely walk away. Sam, you should consult with your wife and solicit her feedback, as she will ultimately make the decision. But Sam, I'll need an answer before I leave here. I can write this up as an unfaithful wife who was misled and caught, and the report will never see the light of day. After 30 years, the department and the DA's office owe me many favors, so you won't have to worry about charges for filing a fraudulent police complaint. Caroline was initially outraged by the idea that her assailant could get away with it. She cried. No one believed me, not the doctor, the police, or even her husband. I grasped her hand, but she wrenched it away and sobbed. Everybody believes you, everybody. It's not about believing you. This is about an awful truth. This is not about letting that thug off the hook. It is about saving you the embarrassment and humiliation of a public trial. Not only will it be heard in court but also in local media. If we had a 50-50 probability of winning, I would not even recommend this. However, it is not even close to that in the end. She reluctantly gave in. I believe she is more concerned with avoiding shame for Tommy than with herself. As promised, Harvey buried the story, and we never heard from the district attorney. Unfortunately, not all stories have happy endings, and ours is one such story. The counseling was very challenging for both of us, especially because she revealed one specific incident that she remembered and how, when she opened her eyes, she assumed I was having sex with her. But even after she realized it was him and not me, she was in the throes of a climax and continued to screw him. The therapist attempted to excuse her behavior by asking me, Sam, if you were in a similar circumstance and you were about to climax, would you be able to remove your Johnny from the woman's mouth or down there? We are back there, I added cynically, out of the corner of my eye. I noticed Caroline wince at the innuendo. I paused a while before responding. First and foremost, Doc, I would not place myself in such a vulnerable situation. So the point is moot. However, since the question is theoretical, my response is yes. We both worked hard over the next 8 months to save the connection. But in the end, it was like ice melting away until the head rolled off and separated. Strangely enough, I had almost forgotten about the sex. It was the vision of her descending those steps, reaching up to kiss his face, and giving me one more stubborn look as she allowed him to wrap his arm around her and take her out the door and, in retrospect, out of my life. Oh, she claimed that she was upset and did it to irritate my nose. But the thought that she wanted to injure me in that way was too much for me to bear. There was too much contempt, betrayal, and lying. I cautioned her about the potential implications. But she chose to ignore them and proceed in short. She made her bed. I will not sleep with her in that bed. She'd have to sleep alone. It's been 2 years since our painful divorce. I gave Elaine the house till Tommy is 18 or graduates college. But in reality, I'll probably just hand it to her in either case. I had a pension and a prosperous business. And she eventually received $250,000 from the corporation, despite the fact that they denied any wrongdoing. However, she was able to exact some vengeance on Daniel Hunter. Our counsel informed us that a legal claim was unlikely to succeed. But our attorney did send our notarized statements, as well as a copy of the drug report, which the maggot categorically denied having any involvement in. However, there had been 2 sexual harassment allegations against him at his former branch office that had been either purposefully or accidentally ignored. Another female co-worker alleged that he had fondled her in the break room. The other was a married female employee who had requested a transfer to a city where her husband was being moved. Hunter assured her that with his influence, he could ensure her transfer if she simply gave him a BJ. Neither claim could be proven. And even though Elaine's charge fell into the same he said, she said category, the corporation was obviously tired of him exposing them to potential lawsuits. He not only did not receive his promotion to London, but he was also terminated, which resulted in no letter of reference after 12 years of service. The corporation simply paid Elaine the money to avoid public humiliation and a costly litigation. We both regretted that our marriage was not recoverable, but we recognized the folly of perpetuating a masquerade that was harming our son. As far as I know, none of us dated for more than a year. But Caroline has been seeing someone very frequently recently. He is several years younger than her and was widowed at a young age. He appears to be a good guy, and when we do meet, he makes an effort to be pleasant. However, it is impossible to forget 19 years of closeness with one's wife. So despite my politeness, I was initially unimpressed by his friendly gestures. However, my jealousy has subsided gradually, and I now wish them well. I'm confident the woman I'm currently seeing has had a significant impact on my changing mindset. Alicia had previously been a customer for several home remodeling companies, and she was granted a divorce over a year ago after her abusive alcoholic husband went on a tirade that placed her in the hospital with a concussion and cracked collarbone. Her 14-year-old son Kevin and I have grown close, and I've invited him on several recent outings with Tommy. The boys seem to get along well. And while my relationship with Alicia has grown intimate, we have separate dwellings to maintain the boys' impression of decorum. However, we are still hesitant to commit to marriage. Time will tell. About the bit that I had always kept buried. While Caroline exacted her retribution on Daniel, mine was yet to arrive. Throughout my years in the police force, I've met a lot of people, good, awful, and plain ugly. But sometimes you encounter someone who is physically ugly but has a moral compass in specific situations. One such man was Mario. He was an Irish gang enforcer. I arrested him 3 times for assault, but each time he was released. I met him 3 months after the event involving my wife. He greeted me like a long-lost friend, and we talked about life. 5 days later, he contacted and wanted to meet me at a nearby bar. I greeted him, and after we finished drinking, he requested me to follow him to the parking lot. When we arrived at his car, he stated, "There is a gift for you." He opened his trunk and saw a little back inside. There was a little jar similar to those found in school biology labs. He pointed his phone's light at it. It included what appeared to be a male organ and 2 testicles. "Your wife's tormentor will never face a woman again. Oh, don't worry, he's alive." We made certain that he was alive. He simply won't be the big man anymore. I had no words for Mario. I shook his hand and headed home. Sometimes life gives you unexpected gifts. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.